I love video games, and as I've gotten older I've started to appreciate horror games more and more. And now, as a trophy hunter, I thought it would only be right to go back and get one of the more daunting trophies in gaming, Outlast's Lunatic Trophy. This trophy is by far one of the most terrifying things I've ever had to do in my entire life.
I haven't had a very hard life.
The trophy requires you to beat the main game on its hardest difficulty insane mode. This means faster and stronger enemies, less batteries to use, and more importantly, if I die, I start all the way from the beginning.
No, don't like that.
Now, I will say at the start that it wasn't my first time playing the game, and I had completed all the other trophies before attempting this, but as you can see, this was 10 years ago. And so I think it's fair to say that I was by no means familiar with the game and wasn't ready to tackle its insane mode yet. And so before even attempting an insane run, we played through the main game and the DLC on Nightmare mode to rejig our memory around the story, the map, and the enemy's movement patterns. I'll take you through the story and also give you some tips and advice on how to tackle the hardest enemies in the game, should you decide to be a lunatic yourself and go for this trophy. If you're not interested in the story and just want to see my insane run, click ahead in the timestamps below. You play the game as Miles Upshur, an investigative journalist who travels to Mount Massive Asylum after being sent an email from a whistleblower telling him about all these inhumane experiments being conducted at the asylum. The game starts with Miles pulling up to the asylum in his car, and rather than calling in for backup, he decides to climb through a window, crawl underneath a broken door, and even after seeing multiple people hanging from the ceiling, he puts on a brave face and continues his way in. After bumping into my ex-girlfriend, Miles is quickly introduced to the priest who will prove to be a huge pain in the arse for the rest of the game. Now, by this point we're coming up to the first part of the game where in an insane run things can actually go wrong. You're tasked with turning on 2 switches and pulling a lever in a very dark set of rooms, and some guy with the most disgusting pair of feet I've ever seen has made it his life's mission to follow you around and ruin your day. The trick here is to avoid this guy by hiding under beds and then running straight past him as he bashes through the door. You can get hit by him once, but if he hits you twice, that's it. After what I hear is a pretty common occurrence, we get drugged by the priest and put in prison. Eventually a kind gentleman opens the door and we continue our way through the asylum and eventually find ourselves in a corridor, which will be the next big troublesome section in the game. The first thing you need to do here is to grab the battery in this room, and then once you've done that, you need to open the door to the control room, bait this guy into chasing you, go all the way back down the corridor and hide under this bed until he eventually goes through a different door and leaves forever. You then flick a switch and are immediately chased by another dude who, if you're feeling brave, you can just run past and take one hit from, or if you're like me and you're pretty risk averse, hide in a locker until he passes you and then make a run for it. You keep going until you're eventually blown out of the corridor onto a pile of bodies, and immediately after that you have what I believe is one of the scariest parts of the insane run. You have to quickly run up these stairs and Chris Walker is going to drop down right in front of you, which means instead of going forward you need to hop over this railing to avoid him. But I swear I don't know if it's the music or whatever, but every time I did it, it felt like Chris Walker was right behind me, and every time it scared the shit out of me. Once you make it out of the prison area, it's time for the sewers, which, in my opinion, is probably one of the easier sections of the game, apart from how bloody dark it is. The only kind of scary bit in this section is when you need to make your way towards the ladder, but so long as you path alongside the left side of the room rather than going straight towards it, you shouldn't bump into Big Chris at all. After doing a quick loop-de-loop around these walls with this guy, we're into the male ward. The first big encounter in the male ward is the chase scene, which can be terrifying because of the music playing, but so long as you're fast and don't stop or get lost, you should never get caught. It does, however, have one of the least favourite parts of any Outlast game, and that's this.
You slippery little whore!
This game is such a piece of shit because after all the horror you escape, you can still die by just not timing a jump properly, and this isn't even the worst one, as you will soon see. But anyway, after escaping the chase, you come face to face with Traeger, who is even worse of a doctor than the one we met in Far Cry 3. After escaping his chair with a few less fingers than we arrived with, we get to one of the more challenging parts of the run. The first thing you need to do here is hide behind this door and wait for Traeger to walk in and start torturing the guy attached to the bed, at which point you make a run for it. After climbing through a vent and going into this room, we bait Traeger into chasing us, but slam the door on him quickly, pushing these things out of the way as quickly as possible. We grab a key, and as Traeger goes to chase us again, we do the same thing we did the first time because we're just too clever for this wrinkly freak, and like that we are done and Traeger meets his gruesome end. We finally make it outside, which is by far the darkest part of the game, and the part where you're going to need your camera battery the most, because it requires you to suddenly become Batman and make multiple jumps across rooftops. You have 2 encounters with Big Daddy out here, which are equally terrifying, mainly because you can hear him but you can't see him. The trick for the first encounter is to hug the right side of the wall until you can climb out, and the second encounter you need to bait Chris into chasing you and then do a loop around this kind of play area and get inside the hole. By this point you're at the female ward, which was really intimidating at first, but once you know what to do is actually pretty simple. You need to find 3 separate keys for the laundry chute. There will be 2 rooms with a key and no enemies inside. The trick here is to close the door, grab the key, wait in the corner for the enemy to break and walk in, at which point you run out. The other room has a key and an enemy in there, but they only start chasing you once you've grabbed the key, and they're really slow, so just grab the key, run out, oh yeah, and pick up this battery. Once you've picked up all 3 keys to open the laundry chute, you make your way through the asylum until you eventually lose your camera down a hole, which you have to go and retrieve. Immediately after finding your camera, you're thrown into a terrifying chase sequence, which you can easily get stuck in if you don't know the way out. However, we escape that chase and eventually say goodbye to our priest friend, who gets exactly what he deserves. We give Chris Walker the slip by hiding behind a bathroom toilet, and like that we're in the final section of the game, the lab. Now the lab is actually pretty easy, so long as you don't get stuck and never stop running. However, there is one absolutely terrifying bit, and it's this. To make it all the way to the very end of the game on insane mode only to fail at this jump, there's no way I would ever attempt this challenge again. I had to get it right the first time. And so, with our nightmare playthrough done, it was time to start our insane run. Our first insane run, we entered the asylum the same way we always do. We grabbed the keycard and watched as the father shut down the power as per usual, at which point we hid in the locker and got ready to make our run past big old Chris. Now the strategy here is to just wait until Chris paths towards the controls, at which point you break out of the locker and make a run for it, and that was the plan. I have no idea how Chris was able to turn around and grab me that quickly. He must have been watching some Michael Jackson videos. Anyway, thankfully this was very early in the game, so I didn't have a breakdown, and it was time for our second run. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please leave a like and subscribe. It is a huge help. Our second run went a lot better. I was flying through the asylum, avoiding every enemy and conserving camera battery. I avoided Chris in the control room, Traeger, I escaped the naked twins in the prison. I was more than halfway through the run-up, and until this point I had done everything perfectly. And then, for some reason or another, Chris Walker decided to master another skill, the skill of teleportation. I ran along the right side of the wall like I had done previously, and rather than pacing the center of the map, Chris for some reason or another ended up right next to me. So that was the end of that run, and after a good night's sleep, it was time to go again. Everything was going great and according to plan. I'd gotten really confident through the game, and I was basically speedrunning through every section, never needing to pause or check any guides. However, this would prove to be my downfall. Eventually I end up back in Traeger's hospital and I completely fucked up. I went the wrong way, which caused Traeger to catch up with me. I panicked, and sadly before I could push this fucking thing out of the way and get through the door, it was curtains for our third run. Now if you've seen my Outlast 2 or my Little Nightmares video, you know that whenever I'm getting downhearted in a video game, I need some motivational content to pick me back up, and so I went to my go-to motivator, Joe Biden, for some sound words of inspiration.
I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true international effort to pressure. Mobilize true international effort to pressure.
Joe always knows what to say, and with those words in my mind, it was time for our fourth run. I'd made it past every major encounter and was now all the way at the lab. I checked guides to make sure I didn't run the wrong way, and it was all going according to plan. However, there was one thing that guides just cannot help you with, and that's the jump. This is by far the worst part of the game. I took a deep breath, thought of Joe, and did what I had to do. I made it by the skin of my teeth, and like that, I was at the very end of the game. There's one more jump after this, but it's not one you can actually make, and so, as we hobbled out of the lab to an unfortunate end, I waited excitedly to see this trophy pop. I'd done it, and 10 years later, my Outlast main game trophy collection was complete. I also decided to tackle Insane Mode on the DLC Whistleblower, which actually wasn't too bad. I think the worst part by far was the fact that I had to watch the entire cutscene with the groom twice over, which, if you've played the game, you just know is too much. I went through the DLC once on Nightmare Mode and then breezed through the first Insane run to get the Bow Whistler trophy, and like that, we had 100% on Outlast 1 and Outlast 2. Coming back to Outlast after all these years was great. The games are fantastic and an absolute must-play for anyone who likes horror games. Playing them on Insane Mode is terrifying, but also becomes really fun as you learn all the movement patterns and actually become confident enough to speedrun your way through. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, it really helps out a lot. I'll be putting more Platinums out very soon. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.